So let me give you a little bit of history here on what I want to talk about. So we all are familiar with what happened December 7th, 1941, the attack on Pearl Harbor by the Japanese. I think because it was so long ago, we don't really remember that time. We weren't around, most of us weren't. But there's some very interesting things that happened during the war here in the U.S. that I think we can harvest some lessons from. The first is that when the war broke out, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, said that we have to defeat these powerful enemies, and we can't just beat them on the battlefield. We also have to outproduce them. We've all probably heard something in our lives about Japanese and German manufacturing. They are the leaders in precision and quality. And I think FDR understood that this was not just going to be a battle that was going to be fought on the battlefield, but we needed to outproduce the German and Japanese war machines. We needed to produce higher quality. We needed to produce high volumes. And that was going to be part of the war effort. As a part of that, there was a gentleman named Edwards Deming, W. Edwards Deming, my apologies, that helped out in this effort. And in 1942, he was asked to write some of the policy and procedure around American manufacturing and systems and the war effort. Previous to that, he had been a physicist for the last 20 years, had worked with the Census Bureau to create the statistical controls of the American census. He then went on and worked for the Department of Labor and Statistics. And if you watch the news tonight, most of the measurements when we talk about our economy came from the great statistician Edwards Deming. Deming was asked to come in and to help streamline American manufacturing during the war. And he took on this opinion that statistical control coupled with employee empowerment would drive America to win. And he was writing a strategy. What Deming understood is that traditional management looks something like this. We have a CEO at the top level management, middle management, supervisors, and labor at the bottom. But because the war had broken out, he was faced with a situation that was quite different than any other time in American history. See, we've all probably heard this term, all hands. We use it frequently ourselves, all hands meetings, or we're bringing everybody together to have a global discussion inside the corporation. But that is actually a derogatory term, because if we think about what it is saying, is it's essentially saying that we are bringing the hands together so that the heads can be heard. So we have this hands and head challenge inside organizations where instruction is coming from the top of the organization and the people at the bottom are really just there to execute on that instruction. That wasn't possible during World War II. Why? Because all of those middle managers were shipped off overseas as lieutenants and colonels and captains. All of the frontline labor became privates and corporals and sergeants. They were all sent overseas. So what was left was the American war machine, the American business environment had to continue to operate in very different circumstances. 15% of the American workforce was under the age of 18. They dropped out of school as early as 12 years old to go work in factories, to work in offices, to help with the war effort. Old guys that couldn't get into the military or had retired, these are men that are older in age, they're out of shape. These are the folks that were asked to come and work in the factories. Couple that with 8 million women who joined the American labor force at that time to really drive the American war machine forward. Now, that created a very unique opportunity, one that had never really happened before in history, and one that still to this day is not very common. And that is that senior leadership had no choice but to go to the front lines and work shoulder to shoulder with the people on the front lines. There was no levels of communication. There wasn't a way to mandate and send things down to the floor. They had to physically get off their asses and go down to the floor and find out what was going on. And the things that they saw and they heard were quite different than what they were used to seeing and hearing. See, executives think a lot about brand and balance sheet and budgets and compliance and competitive things. Middle tier managers think about some systems challenges, but mostly they're concerned about resource challenges, restrictions, bottlenecks. We're not getting enough material on time. The quality of material is too low. I don't have enough people to get the job done. I don't have the right tools to get the job done. Frontline employees are a completely different thing. And the things that frontline employees talk about are not things that have big dollar figures attached to them. No, what they're talking about is an error in the inputs. 25% of the orders come to the floor and they're missing information. They talk about things like the tool does not work properly in this situation. We've neglected the maintenance on this machine, and because of that, we can no longer produce reliable parts from the machine. They're dealing with pain that they're experiencing every single day in the things around them. So what happened in this odd environment from 1941 till about 1944, 45, what occurred was that executives are out talking to the people standing beside them on the front line, and they're seeing that things need to change. Well, think about tools. Most of the tools that were used in manufacturing that time were made for men's hands that were larger. That wasn't the case with women. They couldn't handle that size tools. So executives played go fetch. And they went out and they found the tools and the resources to provide those needed things to the frontline employees in order for them to accomplish the job. They truly worked shoulder to shoulder. Now, why did they do that? Well, they did it because of the war effort. They did it because they were trying to save American lives and, frankly, trying to save the world from Nazi imperialism that was spreading around the world. So they had a why. The how was the most important, though. They couldn't just tell people what to do. They actually had to go out and see how the work was being done, capture and harvest information from frontline employees, and work to resolve those situations. They, as executives, had to play go fetch to the employees. And in that, what we created was an incredible industrial machine, an industrial machine that doubled from the time that the soldiers went off to war until it came back, using the labor of women and children and older, out-of-shape gentlemen. They produced an insane amount of artillery and trucks and planes and tanks, and they won the war because of this. So much so that when the Japanese surrendered and they were asked, what can we give you to help you rebuild your country? They asked for Deming, the person who had created and maintained the system of statistical control and employee empowerment and married those things together. When you look at the post-war effort and what happened in Japan, the creation of Six Sigma and Lean, all of these things were rooted in the work of Edwards Deming. Edwards Deming, after the war, his ideas were somewhat rejected here in the US. Folks like Jack Welch came into American management and they had a very command and control style, a command and control style that worked exceptionally well with gentlemen that had just come out of World War II that were used to getting commands from their commanders and doing as they were told, because in not doing so, they would get killed in action. So we have these two different forms of American management. We have this form where Deming was involved, statistical control and employee empowerment. We have this Jack Welch idea of just mandating and forcing things down, training and enforcing things, accountability at the front line. And which one worked better? Well, what we know that happened after the war was that Deming went out and he went to Japan. Starting in the 1950s, he was asked to come to Japan. Let me see if I have a picture here. Yep, there's Deming in Japan. In the 1950s through the 1980s, he became really a national symbol for quality in Japan. The Japanese widely embraced his philosophy, and they copied exactly what Deming had promoted during the war. Employee empowerment, statistical control, executives going to the front lines, working with people, empowering them, giving them a voice, asking them what's happening, teaching them to be head up employees. See, Japan was different after World War II. And there was another situation that occurred in Japan that was so pivotal. And that was that the Japanese government forced large corporations to provide lifetime employment, meaning you could never fire somebody. Why did they do that? Well, they needed to do it because we had an economic collapsing system, a system where there was not a lot of production. And they understood that if we could have somebody in a village that had a steady job, that would bring economy to that village. That would bring a paycheck into that village. That village then could participate economically and could grow and could scale up and provide services. So it was really a necessity that the Japanese did this. But when Deming went over to Japan and worked with Teiichi Ono, the creator of the Toyota production system and others, he recognized this was going to be a real challenge because he couldn't get rid of underperforming employees. So he recognized that instead of just working from the head down and having them be hands, he needed to teach analysis. He needed to teach design. He needed to show them root cause. He needed to have them be more than just hands, but be eyes and brains that could see what was happening in the organization and had the basic skills in order to analyze and design potential solutions for those. And working directly with management, those frontline employees were able to see discrepancies and problems in the system, create potential proposed solutions for them, present those back to executives. And once again, executives sat in the go fetch role and they went out and solved these problems for the frontline employees. This is the reason why, if you're old enough to remember in the 80s and 90s, what was happening in the US, we got our asses handed to us because the Japanese had figured out a better way. They could produce high volumes of high quality materials. They could push those into the marketplace with much greater reliability. And at the time, American senior leadership, if you watch any of the specials on the economy from that time, go back and find a 2020 episode, or any investigative journalism episodes. And what CEOs were crying out is they were saying, this is unfair. The Japanese have a huge advantage over us because they can do things so much better than us. We need the government to protect us from these predatory Japanese companies that are coming in and taking our market share. The only reason the Japanese were taking that market share is because they were producing a better product at a lower price. And American manufacturers had given that strategic advantage over to the Japanese by not duplicating the effort that they discovered during World War II. Why do I say all this? Well, the American system since World War II for both business and education has been reliant upon one primary thing. We train people to do the work, and then we enforce that training with accountability. That's the system. That's what we did in school. We were taught a lesson. We were then given a test. We were judged on that work, and we were enforced. There was an enforcement. We might not even pass our grade. We might have to go back and repeat if we didn't remember those lessons, if we didn't take that training seriously. Think about what we do inside our businesses today. How much money have you as a CEO spent on training people, on hiring new people, on getting better quality candidates into the system? We spend a lot of time and money doing this. But the interesting thing is the people are not the problem. For the most part, every executive that's watching this and that is out there working in the field every day has a really good understanding of the input costs of their business. They know what it costs to get things done. They know what they sell products for. They understand what the cost of the materials are. They maybe understand the cost of labor, at least from a balance sheet perspective. They also are really good at understanding the outputs. They can read financial statements. They can see cash flow. They can understand how these things work. They know their ins. They know their outs. And some, the best, know the outcomes of their work. What does that mean? That means they know the NPS score. They know the churn rate. They know the return customer rate. They understand all of these things about their customer because they want to understand how to bring more satisfaction to that customer and increase that value. But here's the part that we all tend to miss. We tend to not know how the sausage is made inside of our companies. Many times I sit down with CEOs and I ask them 4 or 5 questions about their business that they are just stunned and can't answer. They don't understand their cost of labor per second. They don't understand, they don't have a list of the bottlenecks. They've never identified the bottlenecks. They don't have any projects that are being analyzed internally where I can actually point to that and say, talk to me about the 3 things that you're currently analyzing to try to design new tools and implement solutions around those. And they look at me like I've got 4 foreheads. Instead, they're focused on utilizing operating systems like EOS, like Great Game of Business, like Metronomics and System and Soul. All wonderful systems, but systems that are completely and totally designed as operating systems to train and enforce something. No one is ever actually saying, is what we're training and enforcing the right thing? Are we training people on broken process? Are we training people on things that we shouldn't be training them on? Are we training them how to do it the least efficient way? What do I mean by least efficient? Everybody's got a keyboard, right? We've all used keyboards many times, and we're familiar with the QWERTY system, QWERTY. That's the first line of a keyboard. Now, why was the QWERTY system created? Well, if you think it's because it was the most efficient method, you are wrong. The QWERTY system is the least efficient method for humans to type. That's right, the least efficient. It was specifically designed because typewriter manufacturers had a serious problem with machines jamming early on when they first came out. If you ever used a typewriter back in the day, you've probably done it. You get the keys mixed up and jammed together, and then you got to get in there and pry them all out and bend them back into the right position. Because this was such a problem with traditional ABCDE methods, they had to create the QWERTY methodology. And the QWERTY methodology was specifically created because it slowed the user down. It required special training to get good at it. We're using the system till to this day. We've all been trained on a system, and we have reinforced and enforced accountability on a system that we know is less than optimal. So what's going on in your business? Do you have things that are less than optimal in your business? And instead of fixing them, you are training people how to work inside that pain? I want you to imagine for a moment if somebody came into your office in the next 10 minutes and they were limping, and you said to them, "What's going on, Joe?" And they say, "I've got just a whole bunch of really sharp rocks in my shoe and just really causing me a problem with walking today." Now, what would you subscribe to them? Would you suggest to them Tylenol or acetaminophen or Aleve or anything like that? No, you would tell them to take their shoe off and remove the rocks from it. Yet, think about how we operate our businesses. We don't do that. We just say, well, you got to suck it up, man. It's part of the job. It's maybe if you walked on the ball of your foot a little bit more, you could. No, that's not the way you do it. You've got to get into what is happening inside the system and correct that. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, executive pain, I talked about this a little bit earlier. Executive pain are these high level, big dollar things around brand and balance sheet, business model, compliance, regulation. Managers are talking about workflow and resources and bottlenecks. Frontline employees are telling you the things that are broken, the observed things that are occurring inside the system that should not be occurring. And if they were removed from the system, you'd have a significantly better throughput from the system. They are the only ones that know how the sausage is made. And if you're in the business of making sausage, that's really important. So Deming actually said in his career, after working in the 40s and 50s, he said that 85% of all problems that occur inside businesses, all restrictions and defects and rework and challenges, were a result of the system and had absolutely nothing to do with the people working in the system. The system was improperly designed. It had statistical errors in it. It was going to produce poor results because the system wasn't good. Now, the interesting thing is Deming said in the 50s and the 60s that it was 85% of all problems were from the system. Later in his career, he revised that and was asked if he would update that statistic. And after working with tens of thousands of businesses around the world, he did update that statistic and said he was wrong. It was not 85%. It was 94% of all of the problems and failures of business are a result of the system. So let me ask you the question. If 94% of all of the problems in your business are a result of a system that's been poorly implemented or poorly designed, how much of your time are you spending on that? If you're like 90% of the CEOs I know, none. You've never spent a moment thinking about the systems. And systems process only comes from two forms. It comes from either evolution and mutation. It just appears in the void. We need to get things done. And someone puts some steps together to get things done. And then they train somebody else on that. And then that person trains somebody else on that. And that thing is enforced. Or it is created through intelligent design. Consistent, constant analysis of what is occurring in the system, designing and implementing new tools, methods, procedures, policies, and best practices that resolve those issues. So if you're spending anything less than 94% of your time on systems and process inside your organization, according to the greatest statistical mind of the last 2,000 years, you're doing it wrong. So how do you solve that problem? Well, process mapping is a really important part. We've got to get into our process. We have to understand what the process is. What are the steps of the process? Now, let me tell you something, and I don't want to call out a specific brand, but there are a number of organizations, some located here in Arizona, that are all about telling you you need SOPs. You got to get standard operating procedures. You've got to do that so it makes it easier to train and enforce. Remember the old style? Train and enforce, train and enforce. Okay, fine. So the system is broken. The system has a ton of garbage in it. And the executives have no idea how the sausage is made. And their methodology is to sit down with the executives and have them write out what the process is and the standard operating procedure. Do you see the fatal flaw with that? I mean, it's actually the exact opposite of what you should do inside your business. Never, ever document anything until you have gone through it with a fine-tooth comb, working with the people in the process, extracting their pain from that, coming up with solutions, resolving those things, creating a more efficient pathway. Then and only then do we want to document standard operating procedures. And those should be somewhat loose. Why? Because we should be auditing process annually. Every single year, we need to go back to our process, look at it again, help identify the new problems that have come in. We've broken this bottleneck. Well, now that's created something else downstream. We now have this new problem. We have a new technology. We're selling a new product. Every year, you have to audit that process. So what is this? This is a process map over here on the right. How do we build that? We build that with your team in a one-day workshop where we spend 3 or 4 hours with frontline 6 to 8 frontline employees that are doing the work, and we have them tell us what the process is. We facilitate that workshop with them. We ask them to show us what it is that they do. We do this at a high level. We call it actions results mapping. So the lines are work and the circles are completed segments of work. So I know it's hard to see on the screen, but this is essentially a giant to-do list for this company on how to take something from the beginning and get it through to the end. It's every single step that goes in there. Now, what comes out of that? You can see it just briefly here. You see these little pink callouts. These pink callouts are pain. These are things in the workshop where we're working with the employees to put this up on the wall. And we explain to them that pain for them cannot be a resource constriction. It can't be a person. It has to be where they've identified something that is occurring that should never be occurring, should not be occurring in the system. And they're making note of that. They're quantifying that. What are the things that we see? Great example, just did a case study for a workshop that was done for a large $500 million a year company. In that, we found that the field service technicians talked about pain like this. 25% of the time, the wrong materials are loaded on my truck, and I have to go back to the shop and get new materials. Up to 90% of the time, some of my tools are missing and I can't complete the work. I've never been properly trained on how to install multiple products that we install, so I'm not sure how to service them. I don't know where they belong. I don't understand those types of things. 50% of the time, our inventory accounting in our app is incorrect. These are the kind of things they're expressing. And what does that mean for an organization like that? It means that somewhere between 25 and 40% of all labor occurring in the field is waste. It's not needed if you just fixed the stinking problem. So the second thing that you get, not only do you get as a leader at the end of this 90-day process of working with process triage, not only do you get this beautiful map that shows the interconnectedness of all of these things inside your organization, you get a call-out list of every single place where your employees feel quantifiable experiences of bottlenecks and pain, things that are slowing them down. We then teach them a methodology called triage. It's a root cause analysis tool. It's unlike anything you've ever seen because everything that you've been taught in school, everything that you've been told about L&D is learning and development is all about training and enforcing. Training and enforcing. We laugh about standardized tests, yet we use the exact same methodology inside of our business. What we want to teach your employees to do is to learn how to analyze problems, determine if something needs analysis, and think about, should we design a solution for this? What are the problems? There's only 4 solutions that come out of a workshop. We need to analyze something. We need to design something, a tool, a methodology, a best practice, a method. We need to train somebody to do something, or we need to enforce that training. Those are the 4: analyze, design, train, and enforce. Now, the fascinating thing is this: if you use an operating system in your business like EOS, almost without exception, you're not going to have very many train and enforce on your list. You're going to get that list at the end of the day, and everything's going to be analyzed and designed. Why? Because you have an operating system that teaches you how to train and enforce. So of course you're not going to have a lot of those things on the list. You've resolved those issues. What you are going to see is a lot of analyze and design, because the toolbox of those operating systems lacks any of the tools to let your people get really creative in their thinking and to understand the root cause of problems and to think in a systems thinking way and to think like an owner should think. We provide all of that in this workshop. The other thing that they get, of course, they get that issue processing root cause methodology that I've got to tell you has been taught to thousands of CEOs around the world, even without the process map. And they say this thing helps them sleep better at night. You identify what the problem is. 60% of the time, our leads come through the website and they're lacking the right information. Does that inhibit our capability? Yeah, it does. Stops us from doing our work. Okay, great. Do we know the most likely cause? No, we don't. Then we have to analyze something. We have to create a project. We have to put some resources there to analyze what is going on. If we do know the root cause, have we designed a best practice or a methodology? No, we've never designed it. Okay, well then let's design and implement a best practice. If we have designed and implemented a tool or a method or a best practice, has everyone been trained on it? Now, training, when I say everyone, I overemphasize that word because so many times, just had it happen here recently, brought a team through and 2/3 of the pain on the map was resulting from their ERP system. And the employees were asking for better training on the ERP system. I went to the CEO and I said, your employees feel like they've not been properly trained in the system. And he blew up and said, of course they have. We had a group come in here 3.5 years ago that trained everybody. And I just asked him the simple question, how many of the people that I had in my room were here 3.5 years ago? 0. So we weren't trained. Everyone has to be trained. Training is not handing something off to somebody. This is like potty training. We don't just hand a roll of toilet paper and say, choose your gender. There's repetition to it. You've got to check. You've got to make sure it gets done properly. You have to make sure that everybody understands it. Do you have visual learners? Are they going to learn in a different way than people that are going to learn from an auditory perspective, or they're going to learn by doing? Do you have multiple methods of training inside your organization that train on the exact same thing, just with different methods? Because if you don't have learning and development. You're not training people. And then finally, enforcement. But I can't enforce training on somebody. I can't enforce that somebody do something if I haven't properly trained them, if I've never developed a solution, if I don't know the most likely cause myself, never analyzed these things. That's why it doesn't work. Training and enforcement does not work because it doesn't make any sense without the other 2 aspects of this. So that's what we teach. Wins 360, I got to tell you, when employees walk out of a workshop after being heard for the first time in 10 years and they see their ideas being implemented inside the organization, making their life better, what do you think happens? Of course, culture improves. Of course, productivity goes up. Of course, these people get excited about the work again. Of course they do. Now, simultaneously, you're producing more product at a lower cost. You're getting more profit out of it. You're getting a higher level of customer satisfaction. That's Wins 360. And then finally, after that workshop, after the workshop where we're sitting down with you and we're sitting down with your frontline employees and creating this, we work with you for 90 days to make sure this stuff gets implemented inside your organization. We've got a series of templates and accountability calls that we put in place to make sure that these things are happening. Or if you identify that some of these things are outside of your wheelhouse, we also are a consulting firm and can help with those things. And we have 75 consultants in our network that do all sorts of things, any kind of software you can think of, ERP implementations, custom software development, learning and training, design work. We know how to help you do all of those things, and we can provide you with those resources. So that's what I wanted to chat a little bit about with you today. This is really about a methodology to help your people think more deeply about the business, do root cause analysis, expose to you the challenges and the pain that's happening inside your organization, create proposed solutions to those, and giving you a list of items that once resolved will make your business flow significantly more smoothly. It'll create more value for your customer. It will give you a huge competitive advantage. Because let me tell you something, after looking at over 1,000 process maps in my career, the problems that you have are very similar to the problems that your competitors have. When you bring your team through a triage workshop and they lay it out on the wall and they talk about the pain that they have, I can tell you almost without exception that that pain is very similar to the same problems your competitors have. So if you go resolve those things and you know that that's their weakness and it becomes your strength, yeah. You know what I'm talking about. This is competitive advantage here. So this is a great way to roll process out in your organization, to get a new look at process, but also to empower your people to work from the head up, not just the neck down. You know, we don't need just hands anymore. We need heads. This is an era of information technology. We can't just rely upon people to just go do the work. We need their brains involved in it as well. We need that collective intelligence, and we need to crowdsource from them the things that we need to move our business forward.
You ready? Let's go. Welcome to the Process Fix, to help you see the bigger picture. Derrick Maines is the elixir, cut and waste away like scissor. Woo! Got a problem, he can solve it. He's an expert with the process, so for sure you'll see a profit. Bottom line profit. Analyze the work your people doing every day. Expose the inefficiencies getting in the way. Advise you how to automate, outsource, abbreviate, eliminate, innovate. Now there's more food up on your dinner plate.